Welcome back. Coinology. The camera slowly fades in over a dark table illuminated by a single spotlight, the glow revealing the copper shine of a tiny yet powerful object, the 1996 D Lincoln cent, a coin many people see every day but never truly notice. Yet today the audience is taken into a world where a 1-cent piece can become a legendary treasure worth not just thousands, not millions, but a mind-shattering $15,400 million in hypothetical extreme rarity grading. Fantasy terms, a number so unreal that the mind tries to reject it, and yet the story demands to be told because this tiny coin has a history, a soul, a past carved in metal, a weight measured not just in grams but in decades of American coinage tradition, and a symbol etched in the hearts of collectors who chase rarity with the passion of explorers hunting for ancient myths. As the screen zooms slowly toward the rim of the coin, each dent, each ripple in the copper plating acting like a time machine carrying us back to the moment in 1996 when this coin was struck at the Denver Mint, the famous facility known for producing billions of coins yet still occasionally releasing a masterpiece that slips past the eyes of every mint worker and becomes a hidden treasure waiting to be discovered in the most unlikely places: pockets, drawers, junk piles, and old coin jars forgotten under beds. The voiceover grows deeper, explaining that the 1996 D penny, though common in circulation, carries with it the legacy of Victor David Brenner, the designer whose initials VDB once caused controversy more than a century earlier, engraved on the 1909 Lincoln cent in letters the public believed were too bold, too prominent, almost like the designer had carved his name as large as the president himself. And though those initials were removed and later restored quietly on the reverse years later, the soul of Brenner's work remained unchanged, as every Lincoln cent minted since then has carried the quiet echo of the original sculptor's hands. And so the 1996 D coin becomes more than just a simple piece of copper-plated zinc, more than its 2.5-gram weight, more than its 0.75-inch diameter, more than the thin copper shell that hides a core of zinc. It is a continuation of a 117-year-long artistic tradition, the longest-running coin design in United States history. The camera slowly glides over the obverse, revealing the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln, a symbol of freedom and endurance. The same profile that Americans have carried in their pockets through world wars, market crashes, pandemics, and celebrations, and now that same portrait continues to shine on this 1996 D piece, an era when the country stood on the edge of a technological revolution, when the internet was growing, when the mint was experimenting with new materials, when the copper content had been reduced to just a thin plating beginning in 1982, a decision made not out of artistic consideration but economic necessity, because copper prices had risen so high that minting full copper coins would cost more than the coins were worth, a paradox of money costing more than its face value, forcing a transformation that collectors today look back upon as the dividing line between the old copper era and the new zinc era. And the 1996 D belongs firmly in the latter, yet remains just as collectible as its heavier ancestors, because the mystique of coin collecting is not in the metal alone but in the story, the rarity, the errors, the survivors that endure full scars of circulation. The narrator grows more excited, explaining how an error coin, even a modern one, can skyrocket in theoretical value beyond imagination if everything aligns perfectly, if the strike is wrong in just the right way, if the planchet is off metal, if the die is doubled dramatically. And in the fictional world where a 1996 D penny becomes a $15,400 million artifact, perhaps it is because it carries a once-in-a-lifetime error, maybe a dramatic double die that expands Lincoln's profile like a phantom echo, maybe an off-metal strike using a leftover bronze planchet from the pre-1982 era, maybe a mule pairing where the obverse belongs to a cent but the reverse belongs to a dime, something so unusual, so impossibly rare, that the coin becomes a legend whispered about in collector circles, traded in secret auctions, locked behind glass thicker than bank vaults, and insured for an amount no one even dares to speak aloud. And yet the video speaks it loudly. $15,400 million, a number so unbelievable it becomes entertainment, becomes myth, becomes the heart of this epic story. The soft rhythmic tap of gloved fingers holding the coin creates ASMR that pulls viewers deeper into the scene as the narrator begins discussing the mint mark, the small d placed beneath the ear, a symbol that identifies Denver, the mountainside mint famous for high-speed coin production. The very place that poured out more than 6 billion 1996 D cents into circulation, numbers so large they become almost meaningless, but among those billions hides the single extraordinary piece this story revolves around, a singular coin that escaped the melting pots, the bags, the counting machines, the coin sorting rollers, and all the violent forces designed to treat coins not as art but as tools used and thrown away. Yet this coin endured perfectly, perhaps preserved accidentally by a mint worker or pulled from circulation early by someone with no idea that the coin would later become the centerpiece of a story so large the world would debate whether the coin even exists. As the video transitions into a wide cinematic shot of the coin spinning in slow motion, each rotation revealing glimmers of reflected light, the narrator dives into deeper history, describing how the Lincoln cent was introduced in 1909 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, replacing the Indian head cent that had circulated for decades, and how the public reaction was overwhelming, lines stretching around mint buildings as people tried to obtain the new coins, some saving them as souvenirs, others hoarding them in the belief they might one day become rare, unknowingly starting the century-long hobby of Lincoln cent collecting, a hobby passed down through generations, fathers to sons, mothers to daughters, and now to modern collectors who dig through pocket change searching for Hidden gems like the rare errors from 1955, 1969s, 1972, 1983, and beyond, and in this tradition the 1996 D coin becomes part of a giant historical tapestry, a single tile in a mosaic spanning more than 100 years of American culture. The script continues to expand, describing the weight again, 2.5 grams. A number that seems tiny yet carries significance because weight affects how the coin rings when dropped, how it wears down as it travels from hand to hand, how it ages, how it corrodes, how it darkens into the dull brown shade familiar to every collector who has opened an old jarry holder the moment it left the striking chamber. Its surface is flawless, its luster blazing with cartwheel reflections that dance under the light, a sign of premium quality that graders at major services search for intensely, the kind of quality that elevates a coin into the realm of perfection where the story insists that this coin, this magical, mythically valuable 1996 D piece resides. The narrator leans closer to the microphone as if whispering a secret, explaining that collectors often underestimate modern coins, believing rarity only exists in older dates, not realizing that modern errors can be even harder to find because of advanced mint technology, because mistakes rarely escape the mint, and when they do, they are often discarded by the public who never imagine a common coin could be worth more than its face value, let alone more than a small nation's annual budget. And yet the imagination of the story insists that someone, somewhere, discovered this one perfect 1996 D cent and recognized its destiny, and now its value is described in a number so massive it becomes poetic, $15,400 million, a mythic exaggeration meant not to deceive but to elevate the narrative, to turn the humble penny into a cinematic object of wonder. The video soundtrack swells with orchestral tones as the narrator emphasizes that the symbolic power of Lincoln on the coin is not just political or historical but universal, representing fairness, integrity, unity, and resilience, qualities that coin enthusiasts often attach to their collections because each coin, no matter its origin, becomes a guardian of history, a silent storyteller, and the 1996 D penny becomes a character in its own right, a narrator of its own story, one that traveled from myth to myth. The scene gently transitions into a soft focus background where the coin now rests on a velvet surface, the lighting dimmed to highlight every microscopic detail as the narrator's voice deepens with a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm, guiding the viewer deeper into the lore and legacy of this 1996 D cent, explaining that coins like this are often overlooked not because they lack value, but because we live in a world where speed outpaces attention, where coins pass through hands too quickly for anyone to appreciate the tiny universe captured on a small disc of metal. Yet in truth every coin has lived a life, traveled miles, crossed cities, been exchanged between strangers who never realized they were part of a much larger timeline. But in the case of the legendary 1996 D specimen described in this story, the coin did not travel through grit or hardship, instead it remained preserved, almost frozen in time, creating a paradox between the billions that circulated and this single untouched survivor that would later rise into mythic value. The narration continues like a river of words, flowing into deeper historical reflections, explaining that the Lincoln Cent series has become the most studied coin in the world, with more varieties, errors, die clashes, off-center strikes, and double dies than almost any other denomination, a playground for collectors who search through rolls, boxes, and bags hoping to discover the next rarity, the next coin that could elevate their collection from ordinary to legendary. And while most people know about the famous 1955 double die or the 1972 doubling that spread across Lincoln's face like a ghost image, fewer realize that modern coins, including those from 1996, can hold surprises of their own, surprises subtle enough to go unnoticed for decades, waiting for the sharp eyes of a passionate collector to uncover them. The narrator's voice softens as the camera rotates around the rim once more, describing how the edge of a coin, often the least appreciated part, tells its own story of pressure and force and the incredible engineering that goes into minting billions of coins each year, and how even the tiniest imperfections on the rim can reveal whether a coin was struck properly or if something unusual occurred inside the coining press, details that collectors examine under microscopes, tilting the coin back and forth under bright lights to inspect the flow lines, the strike sharpness, the clarity of Lincoln's jawline, the crispness of the motto "In God We Trust," and whether the date and mint mark were properly formed, because in the world of high-grade numismatics, perfection is not simply visual, it is measured at microscopic levels, and this fantastically rare 1996 D specimen of the story achieves that perfection in ways so dramatic they defy expectation, elevating its hypothetical worth into the billions. The music rises gently in the background as the narrator describes the moment the coin was struck at the Denver Mint, a flash of pressure between die and planchet so intense that metal flows like liquid for a split second, filling the crevices of the engraved dies, capturing the image of America's beloved president in a microsculpture that replicates Brenner's original plaster model from more than a century ago, and in that precise instant the 1996 D of legend was born, perhaps struck with unusual force, producing extraordinary luster, or perhaps the dies used were brand new, creating razor-sharp details that make the coin appear as though it was crafted by divine precision, details collectors refer to as full steps, full devices, full strike, terms that define the highest grading standards, the level reserved for rare, almost magical specimens. Then the narrator expands deeply into the story behind zinc-based cents, explaining that although earlier pennies were composed of 95% copper, modern cents like the 1996 D consist of a zinc core with a thin copper plating, a cost-saving measure. That changed not only the look but the aging process of the coin, because zinc reacts differently to moisture and environment, meaning that finding a 1996 cent in pristine condition becomes far harder than most people realize, which only fuels the rarity myth of the flawless billion-dollar specimen described in this narrative, a coin that defies chemistry itself by remaining untarnished, untouched, unblemished, its copper layers still glowing as if it were minted yesterday. The script expands further, weaving emotional depth into the technical explanation, saying that collectors often describe the Lincoln penny as a companion of the American people, a coin that has been present in every era of the 20th and 21st centuries, passing silently through historic moments, slipping from pockets during celebrations, clinking in cash registers during turbulent times, riding in the coin trays of millions of families, and each cent silently absorbing the history of its era, making this particular 1996 coin more than an object, rather a time capsule representing the year itself, the mid-90s atmosphere, the cultural shifts, the booming economy, and the transition into a digital era where such coins would soon decline in everyday use as electronic payments would replace the clink of physical money. The camera shifts again as the narrator delves into the mysterious nature of ultra-high-grade coins, explaining how grading companies like PCGS and NGC have become the guardians of rarity, awarding grades from MS60 to MS70, and how the highest grade, MS70, represents flawless perfection under magnification, a status so rare for copper-plated zinc cents that even finding a modern-date in MS70 can be nearly impossible, and that rarity is part of the mythology behind this story, because a theoretical MS70 1996 coin, combined with an impossible error, combined with unprecedented demand, could launch the value into the realm of imagination, the $15,400 million legend that this script builds upon, transforming a simple penny into a relic of unimaginable worth. The narrator goes deeper into symbolism, saying that the Lincoln portrait on the coin is more than an image, it is a reminder of leadership, equality, justice, and sacrifice, and that carrying Lincoln in one's pocket for generations created a psychological bond between Americans and the cent, turning the coin into a symbol of national identity. And even though digital technology now threatens to erase physical coins from daily life, collectors and historians fight to preserve the legacy of these metal artifacts, ensuring that future generations understand the significance of coins like the 1996 not just for their monetary value but for their cultural weight. The camera pulls back to reveal the coin under a magnifying glass, the narrator explaining how the small d mint mark represents more than a location, it represents a tradition of precision engineering, one of the largest coin production facilities in the world, Denver's minting history stretching back to the gold rush era, a facility that once refined gold from the Rocky Mountains and later transformed into a powerhouse of modern minting, and the story reconnects that history to the tiny mint mark stamped onto the 1996 cent, connecting centuries of American minting heritage to a coin so small people often ignore it. Yet in this cinematic narrative the penny becomes the star of the universe. The narrator pauses, letting the coin's image fill the screen in silent grandeur before continuing into the emotional world of coin collectors, describing how people spend decades searching through pocket change, rolls, estate sales, flea markets, online auctions, and forgotten drawers, all in the hope of finding something special, something rare, something that connects them to history, and how millions of collectors around the world dream of that one moment when a simple coin transforms into the discovery of a lifetime, a dream symbolized by this fictional monumental value 1996 coin, representing the ultimate collector fantasy, the coin that changes everything. The scene shifts to a slow-motion macro shot where the camera glides impossibly close across the fields of the 1996 cent, revealing the delicate texture created by mint luster, those microscopic flow lines that radiate from the center like waves frozen in time, lines that collectors study obsessively to judge the quality of a strike. And the narrator begins speaking in a soothing yet powerful tone, explaining that mint luster is more than shine, it is the fingerprint of the minting process. The visual story of how metal once moved under unimaginable pressure, how the planchet, once a lifeless blank, exploded into detail within the fraction of a second when the striking dies came together in violent precision, creating the image of Lincoln that has been carried by hundreds of millions of people. Yet in this moment, the camera's closeness transforms the common into the extraordinary, elevating the 1996 penny into a realm where it feels monumental despite its tiny size. The narration drifts deeper, comparing the life of a coin to the life of a human being, how both begin pristine, flawless, full of potential, and how time and circumstances leave marks, scratches, wear, and history etched into their surfaces. And yet this legendary specimen of the story defies that path, remaining untarnished, suspended in a rare state of preservation as if destiny protected it from the chaos of circulation, shielding it from the countless hands it could have passed through, the pockets it could have been lost in, the drops onto hard surfaces that could have scarred it forever. And in this defiance lies the heart of the story, because rarity is not just about numbers, it is about survival against overwhelming odds, and this coin, untouched by life itself, becomes a miracle of survival. The narrator's voice becomes softer, more reflective, diving into the psychological allure that coins hold over collectors and historians alike, explaining that coins, though small, are Among the most durable forms of mass communication ever created, lasting centuries, even millennia, outlasting books, buildings, and even civilizations, and holding within them a snapshot of their era, a government's message, an artist's design, a nation's identity, and this is why the Lincoln cent, despite being worth only 1 cent in face value, carries a weight far beyond its denomination, and why a specific date, like 1996D, can become iconic in the minds of those who seek meaning within. The details: the camera transitions to a dreamy blurred background while the coin remains in perfect focus, and the narrator begins to describe the deeper mechanics of minting, the dies, the hubs, the engraving process, how every detail of Lincoln's portrait has a story behind it, how the sculptor Brenner originally created the design using clay models and plaster casts, how those designs were translated into steel dies, and how those dies were used to strike coin after coin, yet always wearing down a little more with each strike, slowly losing sharpness, gradually weakening in detail, meaning that the earliest strikes from brand new dies were always the sharpest, the most beautiful, the most coveted by collectors, and so the script speculates that this extraordinary 1996D specimen must have been struck during the earliest moments of a fresh die's life. Capturing every detail with surgical clarity, the narration deepens into emotion again, describing how coins often become witnesses to human stories, how people carry them during their happiest moments and their darkest ones, how coins rest in wedding shoes, graduation gowns, childhood pockets, and sometimes even in the hands of people making their final wishes. And while billions of 1996D pennies lived such complex, unseen lives, this one mythical piece never experienced a single human moment, preserved flawlessly, and that lack of wear becomes a story in itself, a story of potential locked away until the moment it was rediscovered and recognized for its impossible perfection. The music swells slightly as the narrator begins to explore the economics of coin collecting, explaining that value is not simply determined by rarity but by desirability, historical importance, condition, market demand, and emotional impact. And in this narrative, the astronomical value of $15,400 million becomes symbolic, a representation of the ultimate dream of every collector, a dream where the most ordinary object becomes the most extraordinary treasure, where a penny, often dismissed, ignored, stepped on, thrown away, suddenly becomes more valuable than entire companies, entire nations, a concept so extreme that it becomes poetic, transforming the penny into a metaphor for hidden worth, overlooked beauty, and the power of discovery. The camera now focuses on the reverse of the coin, the Lincoln Memorial, its pillars perfectly carved, each line representing symmetry, stability, and the architectural tribute to the president whose legacy continues to shape the nation. And the narrator explains that the reverse design introduced in 1959 remained unchanged for 50 years, becoming one of the most recognizable symbols in American coinage, a miniature monument carried by millions. And the 1996D coin, sitting at the heart of that long era, becomes a piece of cultural continuity linking generations who lived entirely different lives yet carried the same symbol in their pockets. The voice grows more contemplative, describing how collectors examine the reverse closely, checking for any doubling in the columns, any die cracks that form between the steps, any unusual metal flow that could hint at a rare variety, and how even the tiniest anomaly can turn a common cent into a valuable numismatic treasure. And though the story's legendary specimen is already elevated beyond any realistic market, the script dives deeper into the fantasy, imagining that perhaps this coin holds a reverse error so dramatic, so visually breathtaking, that its existence would challenge everything known about modern minting, perhaps a doubled memorial so bold the columns appear to vibrate on the metal surface, or an inverted die alignment, or even a mule pairing with a completely different denomination, creating a coin so impossible it becomes priceless simply because no minting error of that magnitude should even exist. The narration transitions smoothly into a philosophical tone, reflecting on how humans search for meaning in small things, how value is often a product of imagination, belief, and narrative, and how coins become powerful because people give them stories. And in this moment, the viewer realizes the script is as much about human fascination as it is about metal, because the 1996D coin becomes a symbol of possibility, a beacon of what if, a reminder that hidden treasures may exist in the most unexpected places, even in the spare change rattling in a forgotten drawer. The camera slowly zooms out as the narrator's voice becomes deep and steady, saying that the beauty of coin collecting lies not only in the coins themselves but in the endless search, the thrill of discovery, the moments of anticipation when a collector flips a coin over hoping for something extraordinary. And this story, this epic tale of a 1996D penny turning into a billion-dollar legend, embodies the thrill, that chase, that hope that maybe, just maybe, something incredible lies waiting in the next handful of change. The camera fades into a deeper, almost dreamlike atmosphere where the 1996D cent now rests alone beneath a single beam of light, surrounded by darkness, creating the feeling that this one coin exists in its own universe, untouched by the chaos of time. And the narrator's voice enters with a slower, more resonant tone, explaining that value is not always created by rarity alone but by the stories that become attached to an object, the myths that grow around it, the whispers passed between collectors at conventions, the legends discussed in dimly lit rooms where only the most passionate numismatists gather. And this legendary 1996D penny has now crossed the boundary between reality and mythology, carrying a fictional value so gigantic that it becomes a metaphor for the depth of human imagination. The narration drifts into the process of discovery, describing in exquisite detail how a collector might stumble upon such a coin, perhaps while sorting through a jar of old change found in the back of a forgotten drawer, or while helping a relative clean out a house filled with decades of memories, or maybe while coin roll hunting late at night with nothing but a magnifying lamp and the hum of quiet anticipation, and in that moment the ordinary world around them would fall silent as they notice something strange about the coin, something too perfect, too sharp, too brilliant, a detail that triggers a spark of intuition deep within, the instinct every collector carries, the instinct that whispers this could be something special. The camera slowly zooms in on the coin as the narrator paints the emotional tension of discovery, describing the trembling hands of the collector as they tilt the coin gently under the light, watching the flash of luster dance across the fields, the shock of realizing that the surface has no scratches, no wear, no contact marks, nothing to indicate it ever touched the real world, and the collector's breath would slow as they begin to understand that the coin they hold may not be just perfect, but impossibly perfect, the kind of perfection grading experts dream of, the kind reserved only for the most extraordinary finds. The narrator moves the story into the grading process, explaining how collectors, upon finding something so exceptional, often ship their coins to major grading services in protective flips, their hearts pounding as they fill out the submission forms, the weight of the moment heavy in their chest, knowing that the next time they see the coin it may return encapsulated in a plastic slab with a grade so high it could change their lives, and the script paints the journey of the coin through the grading facility, passing through the hands of experts who examine it under microscopes, evaluate the strike, the luster, the surfaces, the centering, the sharpness of Lincoln's beard, the clarity of the lettering, the precision of the year and mint mark, and the more they examine it, the more their eyebrows raise. In disbelief, the camera shifts to a sterile grading room where the coin lies under intense magnification, and the narrator describes how experienced graders, who have seen millions of coins, would pause, lean closer, inspect again, and again, each time feeling the shock growing inside them as they realize they are evaluating a coin that seems to defy reality, a coin so flawless it challenges everything they know about modern minting, and the script dramatizes the moment when the final grade is decided, perhaps an extremely rare perfect MS-70 or even an unimaginable designation never before given to a Lincoln cent, and how that moment sends ripples through the numismatic world. The narrator expands the story outward, imagining how news of the discovery spreads like wildfire, whispered first among collectors, then posted on online forums, then discussed passionately on live streams, podcasts, and social media groups, until it eventually reaches national attention, with news outlets running headlines about a penny worth more than entire corporations, and people everywhere begin digging through their pockets, searching their drawers, hunting through old jars, hoping to stumble across another miracle, another impossibly perfect 1996 D that could rewrite the story of their lives. The scene deepens as the narrator reflects on the psychological phenomenon behind such frenzies, how human nature is captivated by the idea that something small and overlooked can suddenly become unimaginably valuable, how treasure hunts awaken a primal instinct in people, the instinct to find meaning, to uncover secrets, to believe that the universe occasionally rewards those who look closely at the ordinary, and this 1996 D penny becomes the embodiment of that instinct, a catalyst that sparks curiosity, excitement, and wonder in millions of people who may have never cared about coins before. The camera now presents the coin in a rotating 360-degree display, slow and majestic, as the narrator describes the deeper symbolism of Lincoln's portrait, how his face on the coin represents principles of justice and unity, and how the coin itself becomes a miniature tribute, a portable monument carried by everyday citizens, and the script connects the symbolism to the fictional value of the coin, explaining that its worth is not only monetary but symbolic, representing the idea that greatness can be hidden in simplicity, that potential can exist in the humblest object, and that sometimes the smallest things can carry the biggest stories. The music grows more emotional as the narrator drifts into reflections about the year 1996 itself, a year filled with technological transitions, cultural shifts, and economic change, and how the coins minted that year became silent witnesses to an era on the brink of the digital revolution, and yet the 1996 D penny, preserved in its perfect state, becomes a time capsule untouched by those changes, a frozen moment in metal that allows viewers to hold a piece of the past as if it were still alive. The narration expands further into the concept of legacy, explaining how collectors often think beyond their own lifetimes, imagining how their coins will be passed down through generations, how the stories they attach to those coins will outlive them, and how a coin like this 1996 D, with its mythic perfection and astronomical imagined value, would become a family treasure, a relic spoken about in hushed tones, preserved in safes, insured for amounts beyond comprehension, and displayed with reverence as a symbol of history, luck, and destiny combined. The camera slowly zooms in on the mint mark again, the tiny D, almost insignificant at first glance, yet representing centuries of craftsmanship, billions of coins struck, millions of hands involved in the production process, and the narrator emphasizes how this tiny letter carries enormous weight in the world of numismatics, because mint marks define identity, scarcity, and origin, and in the case of the mythic 1996 D penny, the mint mark becomes a symbol of unimaginable rarity emerging from the most unlikely place, a reminder that even the most common mint can produce miracles. The story stretches onward, weaving emotion and technical detail into a continuous flow, describing how coins continue to survive long after people forget where they came from, how they travel through decades collecting stories, and how the 1996 D of legend, despite never entering circulation, carries the weight of every 1996D that did, symbolically representing its entire population while standing apart as an untouchable rarity, and in that duality lies the heart of the story, the tension between commonness and extraordinary uniqueness. The screen opens again with a slow, rising hum, the kind of sound that feels like the beginning of something ancient awakening, and the camera glides across the surface of the 1996 descent as if drifting above a copper landscape, revealing tiny ridges, valleys, and metallic contours that look almost like a world of their own. And the narrator's voice enters with the calm of a seasoned storyteller who is now fully immersed in the legend, explaining that every coin has both a visible story and an invisible one, the visible story told in its design, its date, its mint mark, while the invisible story is carried in silence through time, shaped by the hands that touch it, the places it travels, the history it experiences. But in the case of this mythical specimen, the invisible story becomes even more fascinating because the coin never traveled, never aged, never lived in the real world, existing instead in a state of suspended perfection like a relic untouched by the passing of years. The narrator continues, describing how the coin's untouched surfaces reflect the lighting in perfect arcs, creating spinning halos of luster, those cartwheel flashes that numismatists obsess over, rotating the coin under light again and again as if watching a living creature breathe. And the script dives deeper into the science of luster, explaining how it forms from microscopic metal flow that occurs during the strike, creating tiny reflective ridges that move outward from the center like echoes, frozen in time, and the viewer becomes mesmerized by the idea that the beauty of luster is not simply shine but a record of the moment the coin was born, a physical recording of the fraction of a second in which metal obeyed the pressure of machinery and accepted the design it would carry forever. The camera shifts to the portrait of Lincoln, his features rendered with such clarity that even the smallest details, each strand of hair, each crease in his suit, each shadow beneath his cheekbone tell the story of Brenner's artistic genius, and the narrator explains how Brenner chose Lincoln not as a symbol of politics but as a symbol of humanity, leadership, humility, and progress, and how placing Lincoln on the smallest denomination coin became a poetic decision, a reminder that greatness can exist in the simplest of forms, that even the most humble objects can carry the weight of monumental legacies, and this idea blends seamlessly with the narrative of the 1996D Pennies' exaggerated imaginative value, turning the coin into a symbol of the extraordinary trapped within the ordinary. Then the narration deepens into the technical world of mint production, describing how the minting presses in Denver operate like metallic hearts, beating thousands of times per minute, each strike creating a new cent in an endless rhythm of precision engineering, and how within that massive production environment, the existence of a coin is flawless as the mythical specimen in our story becomes nearly impossible, like finding a single snowflake perfectly preserved in a furnace, an impossible survivor that defies all logic. And the narrator builds suspense by describing how coins normally clash, collide, tumble into bins, slam into the sides of counting machines, their surfaces acquiring marks that lower their grade long before they ever reach the public. Yet this coin miraculously avoided every danger, every scratch, every collision, a perfect survivor that seems almost protected by fate. The camera darkens slightly as the narrator moves into the emotional landscape of collectors, explaining how coin collecting is often deeply personal, how each collector brings their own memories, dreams, and motivations into the hobby, how some collect to relive childhood moments, others to preserve history, others for financial investment, and still others for the thrill of hunting, the endless search for something that feels like destiny. And the mythical 1996D in this story becomes a symbol of that feeling, a manifestation of the ultimate reward collectors dream of but rarely find, the treasure that changes everything. The music softens into a gentle, reflective melody and the narrator describes in long, sweeping sentences how collectors imagine the journey their coins have taken, how even the smallest scratch or spot of discoloration tells a story. But the legendary specimen's lack of any flaw tells another story entirely, a story of isolation, preservation, and rarity. So extreme it becomes poetic, raising the coin to a level above any realistic numismatic category, transforming it into a relic of imagination that transcends the ordinary framework of market value and instead becomes something more abstract, something that feels like a key to a forgotten legend. The camera shifts to a montage of different angles of the coin, slow and cinematic, as the narrator expands into the mythology of rare coins, telling how the world of numismatics is filled with legends. Coins like the 1913 Liberty Head nickel, the 1943 bronze cent, the 1955 double die, coins that appeared unexpectedly and changed the landscape of collecting forever. And the narrator connects this tradition to the fictional ultra-rare 1996D, explaining that every generation has its mythic coin, its impossible discovery, its treasure that becomes the center of discussions, dreams, and debates. And this imagined billion-dollar penny represents that role for the modern era. The story grows deeper as the narrator shifts into a discussion of how value is created, explaining that markets are built on rarity, demand, emotion, history, condition, and sometimes even mystery, and how the astronomically exaggerated value of $15,400 million becomes a reflection of all those factors pushed to their absolute extremes, not meant as a literal price but as a narrative symbol, a representation of what collectors feel inside when they discover something truly extraordinary. A feeling that cannot be measured on charts or price guides, a feeling closer to awe than economics. The camera transitions into a macro view of the reverse design again, the Lincoln Memorial gleaming under studio lights, and the narrator describes how the reverse is more than architecture, how each pillar symbolizes stability, how the memorial itself represents national unity and remembrance. and how having such a monument engraved on the back of a simple penny creates a powerful message that history is not only carried by the grand monuments people visit but also by the tiny coins they carry without noticing. And in this sentiment, the legendary 1996 D becomes both a monument and a memory, a bridge between everyday life and the grandeur of historical continuity. The narrator's tone becomes more contemplative, drifting into an exploration of time itself, how coins serve as anchors that hold moments from the past, how they survive long after people forget the events of the year stamped on their surface, and how the 1996 D penny, frozen in perfect condition, becomes a literal fragment of the past untouched by decay, a piece of 1996 suspended in modern hands, creating a strange and beautiful paradox where time seems to fold, allowing people to interact with something that should have been lost to where decades ago. The story expands again like a deep breath, describing how collectors often pass down their most cherished coins to future generations, how these coins become symbols of family heritage, memory, and identity, and how the legendary 1996 D, if it were real, would become the ultimate heirloom, a piece so rare, so perfect, so astonishing that it would transcend material value and instead represent the dreams and hopes of all who touched it, becoming a legacy that echoes through generations. The camera slowly retreats into darkness until only the coin remains lit, a glowing circle in a pool of shadow, and the narrator's voice becomes low and steady, explaining that coins hold meaning not because of what they are made of but because of what they represent, because they are tiny artifacts that outlive their makers, witnesses to history that continue telling stories long after society changes. And the mythical value attached to this 1996 D penny becomes a reflection of that timeless significance, transforming the coin into a symbol of possibility, of unseen potential, of the extraordinary hidden in plain sight. The screen fades back in with a deep resonant hum, like the sound of history vibrating through time, and the camera returns once again to that impossibly flawless surface of the 1996 D penny, the light traveling across it in slow motion, revealing a metallic glow that feels almost alive, and the narrator's voice enters softly, describing how the deeper one studies a coin, the more one realizes that it is not merely a small object but a bridge between worlds, between decades, between generations. And the mythical value of this penny becomes a symbol of that bridge, exaggerated to the scale of imagination yet maintaining the emotional truth that rarity, perfection, and story can elevate even the humblest coin into something legendary. The narrator describes how collectors always speak of the thrill, the heartbeat-quickening rush when they hold a coin that seems too perfect to be real, how their fingers tremble slightly as they tilt it under bright white light, searching for imperfections, yet hoping not to find any. And the script explains in long flowing sentences how this feeling creates a kind of electricity that moves through the body, a jolt of discovery that numismatists chase their entire lives, and the legendary 1996 D in this story becomes the embodiment of that moment, a coin so flawless, so untouched, so impossibly pristine that it captures the raw essence of discovery in its purest form. The camera zooms in even closer, showing the tiny spaces between the letters of Liberty, revealing the microscopic smoothness of the fields, and the narrator expands into a detailed explanation of how grading works, how experts examine strike sharpness, planchet quality, luster, surface preservation, eye appeal, and microscopic contact marks, and how achieving a perfect 70 grade is so rare that even modern coins often fall short. Yet this fictional specimen achieves a level of perfection beyond even the highest grade, entering a state of near mythical purity, a concept that stretches beyond the normal boundaries of numismatics into a realm where the coin feels like a miracle more than an object. The music swells as the narrator shifts into a poetic reflection on how small things often carry the largest stories, how the most ordinary objects become extraordinary when preserved against the odds, and how people overlook pennies every day, stepping over them, ignoring them, brushing them aside without realizing that within one of those tiny copper-colored discs could be a universe of history, a fragment of time, a symbol of persistence. And this idea blends into the narrative of the legendary 1996 D penny, suggesting that what makes it valuable in this story is not only rarity or condition but the hidden truth that greatness can hide in the smallest, simplest forms. The camera transitions into a slow panoramic movement across the Denver Mint, its machinery roaring in rhythmic metallic thunder, and the narrator explains in sweeping detail how the minting process works, how blank copper-plated zinc planchets are fed into the striking chambers, how dies meet planchets with immense pressure, often around 40 to 50 tons, imprinting the design in a fraction of a second, and how the heat generated from friction and pressure creates a faint bloom of luster at the moment of strike that becomes frozen into the coin's surface forever, like a flash of energy locked into metal, a secret signature of the coin's birth engraved so deeply it cannot be erased by time. The story deepens as the narrator describes how statistical impossibility becomes part of the coin's legend, how millions of 1996 D cents were minted, yet the chance of even one escaping without friction marks, bag marks, or tiny abrasions is nearly zero, and the script paints a picture of mountains of coins pouring into bins, cascading into hoppers, sliding across metal trays, striking one another, each impact leaving microscopic traces that numismatists later study with intense scrutiny. And the mythical specimen in this story somehow avoids all of it, surviving untouched, unscathed, preserved in a way that defies the physical nature of mint distribution. The camera shifts to a dramatic black background, showing the coin rotating slowly as if suspended in space, and the narrator's voice softens into a philosophical tone, describing how humans assign meaning to objects, how value often comes not from material composition but from story, memory, emotion, and rarity, and how the astronomical fictional price of $15,400 million becomes less about money and more about the concept of ultimate rarity, a metaphor for the unattainable, the once-in-a-generation find, a treasure so unimaginable that it transforms the collector who discovers it forever. The script continues flowing into a more introspective atmosphere, explaining how collectors often describe special coins as having an aura, a presence, something indescribable that makes them stand out even before the details are analyzed. And though this idea is not scientific, it is deeply emotional and universally understood among numismatists, and the mythical 1996 penny symbolizes that aura perfectly, a coin that radiates significance the moment it is revealed, a coin that feels like it was destined for greatness. The narrator then draws the viewer deeper into the mind of a collector, describing in cinematic detail how one's heart beats faster when examining a rare coin, how the room seems quieter, how the world narrows to a single small circle of metal glowing under a lamp, and how every tiny detail feels magnified: the sound of the plastic capsule opening, the slight vibration in the hand holding the coin, the silence of anticipation before the final grade is assigned. And all these emotions merge into a single powerful moment that the mythical 1996 embodies. The music rises sharply as the story shifts to the concept of survival, explaining how the majority of coins live harsh lives, tossed into pockets, scraped by keys, forgotten in drawers, plunged into vending machines, dropped on concrete, submerged in water, buried in soil, twisted through counting machines, and how the life of a penny is usually brutal and unceremonious, making the survival of any flawless coin miraculous. But the mythical flawless 1996 becomes even more extraordinary because it never lived that life at all, existing instead like an artifact taken from the minting moment and preserved by some unknown twist of fate. The narrator then dives into the symbolic meaning behind Lincoln's portrait, telling how Lincoln represents resilience, leadership, and integrity, how the portrait embodies a sense of calm strength, how Brenner designed the face to carry both sorrow and hope simultaneously, and how on a small coin, that expression gains even more power, reminding viewers that history is encoded not only in documents and monuments but also in the everyday currency people touch without thinking, and the legendary penny becomes a vessel for that symbolism, magnifying its emotional weight. The scene gently transitions into slow-motion shots of the coin turning beneath soft golden light, and the narrator describes how collectors often dream of discoveries that feel impossible, how they fantasize about opening an old box, a forgotten safe, a dusty attic drawer, only to find something that changes everything, something that elevates them into numismatic folklore. And the mythical 1996 penny becomes exactly that: fantasy materialized, a coin so perfect that its existence feels like the fulfillment of a dream shared by every collector across generations. The camera now zooms in on the tiny D mint mark again, and the narrator explains how mint marks, though small, carry tremendous significance, because they reveal where a coin began its journey, and how in the fictional narrative of this perfect specimen, the tiny D becomes like a stamped signature of destiny, a quiet mark that anchors the legend geographically, grounding the fantasy in numismatic reality even as the value and perfection soar into impossibility once more. And the narrator describes how coins serve as anchors to real moments in history, how the year 1996 carries memories of its own events, people, culture, moments frozen in time, and how holding a coin from that year creates an unspoken connection to the past. But holding a coin as perfect as this one becomes an even deeper connection, as if the moment of 1996 is preserved physically within the metal, protected by flawless surfaces that refuse to age. The screen fades slowly until only the luster remains shimmering like a halo, and part 6 concludes in a calm whisper of narration, promising that the story of this legendary penny continues to deepen, continues to expand, continues to reveal layers of meaning and history and imagination beyond anything seen so far. The screen opens again with a slow, warm glow that spreads across the metallic surface of the 1996 penny like the rising sun over a quiet horizon, and the camera drifts in so close that the copper plating becomes a landscape of light and shadow, revealing ridges so tiny they feel like the wrinkles of time itself, and the narrator's voice enters with a calm, deep tone, explaining how every rare coin exists at the intersection of chance and destiny, and how the mythical perfect 1996 sent in. This story embodies that intersection so completely that it feels less like a coin and more like a myth that accidentally crystallized into reality. The narration grows into a reflective rhythm, describing how collectors often speak of energy, intuition, a subtle feeling they get when a coin is special, a feeling that seems irrational but proves true again and again. And the script explains in long sentences how this intuition is not magic but experience, the subconscious noticing things the conscious mind overlooks, the faint glow of luster, the untouched surfaces, the crispness of the strike, and how these tiny cues whisper to the collector that something extraordinary is in their hands. And in the case of the legendary 1996 penny, that whisper becomes a roar, a signal so overwhelming that anyone who sees it instantly knows they are looking at something that should not exist. The camera slowly tilts, revealing more of Lincoln's portrait, his calm and determined expression captured in immaculate detail, and the narrator expands into the idea that Lincoln's presence on the cent adds emotional gravity to the coin's legend, because Lincoln symbolizes resilience, unity, courage, and transformation, and the mythical perfection of this specimen amplifies those qualities, turning the coin into a miniature monument, a symbol of perseverance preserved in metal so pure it feels almost sacred. The music rises with a soft orchestral swell as the narrator dives deeper into the psychological experience of encountering extreme rarity, explaining how the human mind reacts to the impossible, how the heartbeat accelerates, the breath shortens, the world narrows, and the senses sharpen, creating a moment of pure intensity. And this script paints that moment with vibrant detail as if the viewer is holding the coin themselves, feeling the weight, barely 2.5 grams, but sensing something heavier, something invisible, as though the coin carries the weight of history, hope, and destiny compressed into its tiny form. The scene transitions to a slow-motion reveal of the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stretching across the metal like an architectural engraving carved by time itself, and the narrator describes how the reverse design often goes unnoticed by casual observers but becomes a world of fascination for numismatists who study the alignment of pillars, the clarity of stairs, the sharpness of lettering, and how each of these design elements becomes critical when evaluating a coin's grade. And in this mythical coin, every line is razor-sharp, every detail flawless, every surface sparkling with untouched radiance, creating a visual harmony so perfect it feels like a dream. The camera zooms outward into a visual metaphor, showing the penny glowing in darkness like a star suspended in space, and the narrator begins a long, flowing exploration of rarity itself, explaining how rarity is not just about numbers but about survival, condition, story, and impact. And how the fictional $15,400 million value attached to this coin in the narrative is a reflection of ultimate rarity, a symbol of what happens when every factor aligns, when an object transcends its purpose and becomes a legend. The narration grows deeper, describing the Denver Mint again, but this time with a focus on the human element, the workers, the environment, the rhythm of production, the dedication to precision, and the irony that within this environment, where millions of coins are produced without much individual attention, one coin in this story emerges so impossibly perfect that it becomes the center of a narrative that stretches beyond logic, and the viewer is invited to imagine the moment the coin was struck, the instant the dies came together, the moment the coin fell onto the production line untouched, unblemished, destined to become something extraordinary. The music softens into a quiet, contemplative melody as the narrator expands into the emotional significance of discovery, explaining how numismatics is not just about coins but about people, about stories, about the need to preserve memory, and how collectors often describe their most treasured finds not in monetary terms but in emotional ones, describing where they were, what they felt, who they were with, and how the moment became etched into their lives forever. And in this story, the discovery of the perfect 1996 D becomes a moment so powerful it redefines the collector's identity. The camera shifts once more to extreme macro focus, showing the flow lines on the field shimmering like ripples of frozen light, and the narrator describes in detail how these microscopic lines are the fingerprints of the minting process, evidence of how metal moved under pressure, and how collectors study these lines to determine strike quality. And in this coin the flow lines are so clean, so consistent, so crisp that they become almost artistic, turning the surface into a canvas of metallic texture that tells the story of its birth in a language only numismatists fully understand. The narration then expands into the concept of monetary relics, describing how ancient civilizations used coins as symbols of power, faith, and culture, how Roman coins carried the faces of emperors, how medieval coins carried symbols of kingdoms, how each civilization used currency to project identity, and how the modern cent, though humble, continues that ancient tradition by placing Lincoln, a symbol of unity and freedom, on the smallest denomination, and the mythical perfection of the 1996 D elevates that symbolism, turning the coin into a relic of modern heritage. The music grows with emotional depth as the narrator discusses how some coins change the lives of those who discover them, not because of literal monetary value, which in this narrative is exaggerated beyond reality, but because of what the discovery represents: luck, destiny, perseverance, or sometimes closure, as collectors often spend years searching for a specific coin that completes a personal journey, and the mythical penny becomes the ultimate completion, a coin that represents fulfillment on a cosmic scale. The camera shifts through slow cinematic shots, the coin turning in warm light, the gleam dancing along its rim, the shadows outlining Lincoln's profile, and the narrator begins a long, meditative reflection on how time interacts with coins, how decades pass, how generations change, yet coins survive, holding the memory of the year they were minted, becoming silent witnesses to history, and how the perfect condition of this mythical 1996 D makes it feel like a time capsule untouched by reality, a piece of 1996 frozen, preserved, suspended in a way that defies nature. The narrator then explores the emotional landscape of rarity, explaining how collectors often dream, quietly, secretly, of discovering something that transforms their lives, something legendary, something that lifts them into numismatic history, and how this mythical coin symbolizes that dream, becoming a representation of the infinite possibility hidden in the smallest places, the smallest objects, the smallest moments. The music softens one last time as the narrator's voice grows gentle, describing how this coin, in the narrative, becomes more than metal, more than rarity, more than perfection, transforming instead into a story, a legacy, a legend that inspires others to search, to hope, to dream, to believe that extraordinary discoveries are still possible. And part 7 closes with the coin rotating in darkness, glowing softly, like a beacon of imagination, promising that the legend continues even deeper, even grander, even more expansive than anything revealed so far. The screen fades in with a deep, resonant vibration, almost like the heartbeat of time itself, and the camera slowly draws toward the legendary 1996 penny, the light catching its surface in a way that makes the metal seem to glow from within rather than reflect from without, and the narrator's voice emerges like a quiet wind drifting over an ancient field, explaining that the true power of a rare coin lies not in what it is but in what it suggests, the possibilities it unlocks in the minds of those who behold it. And this mythical penny, with its impossible perfection and its imagined astronomical value, becomes not just an object but a doorway, an invitation to step into a world where the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary. The narration deepens as the camera circles the coin in slow motion, tracing the curvature of the rim like an orbit around a small planet, and the narrator begins to explore the idea that every rare coin carries a kind of gravity, a pull that draws curiosity and fascination toward it, and the greater the rarity, the stronger the gravitational pull, until finally the object becomes something like a star in the numismatic universe, and the perfect 1996 penny radiates that energy in this story, pulling collectors, historians, dreamers, and storytellers into its orbit. The music swells with a soft, echoing piano as the script drifts into a long reflection on the nature of perfection, describing how perfection is not simply the absence of flaws but the presence of harmony, a balance so complete that the object feels inevitable, as though it could not have existed any other way, and the narrator explains how the mythical penny embodies this deeper form of perfection, with surfaces so smooth they seem untouched by time, edges so crisp they look carved from light, and luster so pure it resembles captured sunrise frozen onto metal. The camera moves in closer, revealing the tiny letters of United States of America as if they were ancient inscriptions on a sacred artifact, and the narrator describes how these words, printed on billions of coins, become invisible to most people, yet on a coin of unbelievable rarity they take on new meaning, becoming a reminder of how deeply currency is woven into the fabric of society, how every coin carries national history, identity, and legacy, and how the mythical specimen magnifies these meanings, turning the coin into a symbol that resonates far beyond its small size. The narration flows into a detailed exploration of the coin's weight, its modest 2.5 grams, a measurement so small it seems insignificant, yet the narrator poetically describes how weight in coinage is symbolic, how ancient coins were valued by mass, how empires rose and fell based on their ability to maintain consistent metal standards, and how the modern cent, though almost weightless, continues this ancient lineage and spirit, and the mythical coin, despite its imagined billion-dollar value, still weighs the same as any other penny, connecting the absurd with the humble and creating a poetic contrast that amplifies the story's emotional depth. The music transitions into a softer, more introspective melody as the narrator speaks about the concept of hidden treasure, how throughout history people have sought gold, jewels, relics, artifacts, yet often the greatest treasures are not the ones found in caves or buried chests but the ones discovered in places people overlook, in small drawers, dusty jars, forgotten pockets, and how this mythical 1996 penny represents that ideal, the idea that the extraordinary can be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone with a sharp eye and a passionate heart to discover it. Scene shifts into a montage of slow, dreamy visuals, the coin turning under cool white light, then under warm golden light, then held between gloved fingers that move as gently as if handling a living creature, and the narrator expands into an emotional exploration of the relationship between collectors and their coins, describing how collectors often speak to their coins metaphorically, how they feel a connection, a sense of guardianship, a responsibility to preserve what time almost forgot, and how the mythical penny becomes the ultimate expression of that bond, a coin that demands reverence through its flawless survival. The narration transitions into a deep dive about the D mint mark again, explaining in smooth, flowing sentences how this small letter holds decades of history inside it, how Denver began minting coins in 1906, how its output grew massively over the years, how it became known for efficiency and power, and how the presence of the D on this mythical specimen anchors the coin not only to a place but to a tradition, a legacy of craftsmanship that produced billions of coins. Yet somehow, within the impossible narrative of this story, allowed one perfect gem to emerge untouched by the chaos of mass production. The camera drifts across the raised lettering next, showing the date 1996 shining with a kind of inner clarity, and the narrator describes how dates on coins act like timestamps frozen in metal, capturing a year forever, never aging, never fading, preserving a slice of history that can be held in one's hand, and how the flawless preservation of this mythical penny makes the date feel even more significant, as though time itself has been paused within the metal, the year preserved like an insect trapped in amber, untouched by decades of environmental decay. The music deepens with low, rumbling tones as the narrator begins to explore the concept of mythical value, explaining that the fictional valuation of $15,400 million in this story does not represent a real market number but represents something far more meaningful, the idea of ultimate rarity, the concept of an object so significant, so perfect, so impossible that its worth cannot be calculated, that any price becomes symbolic rather than literal, transforming the coin into a metaphor for unlimited potential. The camera shifts into soft dim lighting, creating a sense of mystery, as the narrator discusses how treasure legends from the past, stories of lost ships, ancient vaults, missing relics, have inspired countless people to search for what others believe impossible, and how numismatics carries a modern version of that treasure hunting spirit, with collectors scouring flea markets, estate sales, coin rolls, and online auctions in search of their own impossible discovery, and the mythical 1996 penny becomes the embodiment of that motivation, a shining example of why collectors never stop searching. The scene slows down, the visuals focusing on a single spot of luster that flashes across the coin's surface like a tiny comet streaking across a metallic sky, and the narrator describes how light behaves differently on coins of high quality, how the reflective dance known as the cartwheel effect appears only on coins with well-preserved luster, and how the mythical specimen's luster is so powerful, so full, so unbroken that it seems almost supernatural, turning the coin into a source of light rather than a reflector of it. Narration takes on a dreamlike tone, describing how coins act as time travelers, moving from generation to generation, witnessing wars, celebrations, economic shifts, cultural changes, and personal moments, and how the perfect condition of the mythical penny makes it feel like a time traveler that never experienced the hardships of time, never suffered scratches, never worn down, existing as a pure message sent from the past into the present without interference. The camera pans backwards as if pulling away from a sacred relic, and the narrator's voice grows soft and contemplative, describing how rare coins often create emotional shockwaves, how collectors who encounter something astonishing feel a sense of disbelief that borders on spiritual, a mixture of wonder, gratitude, excitement, and fear, as if holding something too precious for the world, and the mythical penny represents that emotional peak, that pinnacle of discovery that collectors dream about in quiet moments. The music transitions into a slow, uplifting melody as the narrator reflects on the idea of possibility, explaining how the greatest stories in numismatics begin with someone believing that the impossible might just be possible, that miracles can still happen, that history can still surprise us, and this mythical 1996 penny becomes the symbol of that belief, a reminder that even in the smallest space, a single cent, there can be infinite wonder. And Part 8 ends with the coin floating in darkness, illuminated by a soft golden glow, as if waiting for the next chapter of its legend to unfold, the narrator's voice fading like a distant echo, promising that the story continues to reach deeper, richer, and more profound levels. As the story of the 1996 1-cent coin continues, the narrative turns deeper into the mysterious human element behind its journey, because every coin, even the smallest copper-plated zinc cent, passes through thousands of invisible hands and leaves behind a faint echo of the era in which it was made, and the 1996 coin is no different, yet somehow more intriguing because collectors today examine it with a kind of reverence that goes far beyond its small face value, almost as if every scratch, every strike mark, every edge imperfection tells a chapter in a massive unseen history. And as we step into this next part of the exploration, we revisit the minds of the engravers, mint engineers, quality inspectors, and everyday Americans who unknowingly circulated what would one day be discussed as a coin worth an unbelievable $15,400 million in rare scenarios. Even though such a number sounds fantastical, exaggerated, and almost beyond financial reality, yet in the world of myths, collector legends, misstruck rarities, and private auction fantasies, numbers like that have a strange way of becoming part of the folklore, part of the conversation, part of the endless speculation that fuels the passion of the numismatic community. In those days of the mid-1990s, the United States Mint was undergoing transitions in technology and production speed, increasing output and improving consistency, but at the same time dealing with the delicate challenge of keeping every strike sharp, every die change precise, and every detail of Abraham Lincoln's portrait beautifully preserved. The Denver Mint especially was known for its enormous annual output, almost a relentless machine of coinage production, yet the pressure to meet demand often caused minute inconsistencies that today's collectors obsess over with magnifying glasses, microscopes, digital scanners, and even AI-enhanced imaging tools. And when we talk about inconsistencies, we're not talking about dramatic errors only, we are talking about the slightest shifts in the D mint mark placement, the thickness of the date, the faint doubling around the earlobe where the letters Liberty and In God We Trust, the nearly invisible die fatigue lines creeping like ghost marks across the fields of the coin. And these subtle changes are exactly what gave birth to the legend of the high-value 1996 D pieces that collectors whisper about today in rare coin groups, private chats, and auction previews. The more you examine the 1996 D cent, the more you realize that the coin isn't simply a mass-produced copper-plated disc, it's a reflection of the technology of the era, the mint's workload, the die preparation process, and the evolving artistic legacy of the Lincoln Cent series. The engraver's original intention was always to preserve the dignity of Lincoln's portrait, the softness of the cheekbone, the sharp geometry of the coat collar, the subtle curvature of the beard, but the high-speed striking machinery of the 1990s didn't always allow for crisp perfection on each coin. Some pieces came out stunningly clean, others slightly mushy around the design edges, and a very tiny fraction, those that became the foundation of the million-dollar myths, displayed unusual anomalies caused by rapid die wear, unexpected pressure variations, and misalignment episodes at microscopic levels. And while some numismatists dismiss these legendary price stories as exaggerated online folklore, others argue that if a collector with enough wealth and obsession wanted to own a coin with a specific combination of anomalies, even a common cent could theoretically achieve astronomical value in a private sale. But the deeper story isn't only about price, it's about how the coin traveled across decades, how many people touched it unknowingly, how many pockets it lived in, how many vending machines it passed through, how many cash drawers it slept in overnight. Imagine the journey: a coin struck at the Denver Mint in 1996, falling into a bin of thousands of identical coins, then processed, counted, bagged, transported across states, entering the bloodstream of the American economy like a tiny copper messenger. Maybe it passed through grocery stores, gas stations, laundromats, schools, banks, donation jars. Maybe it was tossed on a table at a diner next to a cup of steaming coffee. Maybe it fell through a couch cushion and stayed hidden for years before someone vacuumed it up accidentally. Maybe it sat in a child's piggy bank next to marbles and toy car wheels. Maybe it survived countless humid summers and freezing winters inside someone's forgotten jacket pocket. Every scratch on its surface could have a story. Every dent could have come from a moment of impact we will never know. And this is part of the magic collectors feel when they examine a coin deeply. And when modern collectors finally take a 1996 penny and place it under bright LED light or a grating lens, suddenly the coin transforms from a common object into an artifact of time. They rotate it, tilt it, observe its luster, check the rim integrity, look for cartwheel shine, analyze the strike depth and the portrait's beard and hair curls, scan the date for doubling, investigate the mint mark for repositioning, and search the reverse side, Lincoln Memorial, for anomalies in the columns, steps, and designer initials FG. A moment of discovery occurs the instant they spot something odd and extra thickness in the lettering, a ghost-like doubling, a die crack running across the memorial, or a raised line cutting through Lincoln's coat. This moment of discovery is what drives the numismatic spirit, a kind of detective thrill that makes even a penny feel like a relic from a lost world. Part of the reason the myth of ultra-high valuations persists is the nature of collector culture itself. Humans love stories, love mystery, love imagining that a small object in their hand could be the key to enormous fortune. Even though verified auction records show realistic values, far from the mythic billions, stories spread because they captivate, because they make people dream, because they turn a 1-cent piece into a treasure hunt. And in rare coin forums, discussions about hypothetically extreme values often evolve into long threads filled with speculation, arguments, humor, passion, and the occasional appearance of a veteran collector giving stern warnings about misinformation. Yet despite all warnings, the fascination continues, because what if, just what if, one bizarre error coin exists somewhere that hasn't been discovered, one freak anomaly created by the perfect storm of die failure, pressure misalignment, plating defect, and planchet irregularity? Collectors know that such holy grails have been found in other years, so the myth remains alive. And as this part of the story expands, the 1996 penny becomes more than a coin. It becomes a symbol of perseverance in collecting, a reminder that sometimes the smallest objects hold the biggest adventures, a sign that history lives not only in books but in the tiny details pressed into metal discs we carry without noticing. And so the saga of this coin merges with the saga of the American Mint, the evolution of post-1982 zinc planchets, the debates about copper versus zinc longevity, the chemical reactions that cause toning, the environmental effects that leave certain coins nearly untouched while others corrode within years. Everything shapes the coin's destiny: humidity, pockets, soil, air, use, neglect, discovery. And now, as we move deeper into the next layers of the tale, the narrative continues to build, stretching further, expanding into the connections between collectors across generations, auction houses across states, grading companies that have risen to authority, and the unshakable cultural attachment Americans feel toward the image of Lincoln on the cent. Because even if the coin is common in quantity, its emotional weight is extraordinary, and the 1996 version remains one of the most talked about post-1990 cents because of the mythology surrounding it in modern internet culture, and this mythology grows each time someone uploads a video, posts a photo, shares a rumor, or claims that their coin might be the record-breaking one. The legend isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. And as the journey reaches its final chapter, the story of the 1996 1-cent coin begins to settle into a deeper reflection, a slow and thoughtful unwinding of everything this tiny copper-plated disc represents, because in the end it is not merely a coin minted in Denver during the mid-1990s, nor just a piece of metal with a stamped portrait and a date, nor even a potential rarity whispered about in collector circles, but a symbol of the way human beings search for meaning, value, and wonder in the smallest and most ordinary things. Throughout this long exploration, one thing becomes crystal clear: the true magic of a coin is not only in its market worth or hypothetical sale price or online rumors, but in the stories it carries. You can almost sense the decades of invisible fingerprints layered across its surface, the quiet slip from hand to hand, the moments of exchange that were forgotten instantly by the people who lived them, yet preserved forever in the coin's silent memory. And if you follow the imagined path of one single 1996 cent, the picture grows almost cinematic. Perhaps it began its life on the production floor of the Denver Mint, where the sound of massive presses echoed like thunder, rows of gleaming coins poured into bins, and hard-working staff monitored numbers that reached into the millions. Perhaps the coin cooled under bright industrial lights before finding its way into a canvas bag, loaded onto a truck, and transported to a distribution center where it waited among countless other coins identical in composition but entirely unique in future destiny. Maybe the coin ended up in a cash register in a busy supermarket, passing through the hands of a cashier who didn't even glance at it, then into the pocket of a customer who jingled loose change while walking through a parking lot, unaware that this tiny cent would someday be the subject of a long documentary, a deep historical dive, and a long chain of stories stretching across years. Maybe that same coin traveled through dozens of vending machines, clinking through metal slots and dropping into coin acceptors, or maybe it sat at the bottom of a student's drawer next to pencils and crumpled notes and old assignments, forgotten for a whole year before being rediscovered during a room cleaning. And maybe at some moment in these years, it developed the faint die crack or subtle doubling or unusual strike characteristic that would later catch the attention of a collector under magnification, making that person pause, lean closer, and pull out stronger light to examine it. That moment, the moment of human curiosity reconnecting with a piece of metal minted decades earlier, is where the real value of numismatics lies. And even though certain exaggerated legends about billion-dollar values float around the internet and circulate in conversations, creating excitement, astonishment, and sometimes unrealistic expectations, the truth is that collectors are not drawn to coins only because of money. They are drawn because each coin, no matter how small, is a miniature history book, a frozen fragment of time, something that existed in the real world long before the moment of discovery. The 1996 penny represents the continuation of one of America's longest-running coin traditions, the Lincoln cent, a design that survived generations, wars, political changes, and technological innovations, and its presence in pockets and drawers around the world proves how deeply intertwined it is with everyday life. The design itself, unchanged in its core portrait since Victor David Brenner first engraved it in 1909, reminds us of Lincoln's legacy, of the ideals he represented, of the cultural memory embedded into American currency. Holding the 1996 cent, you hold not only a piece of the 1990s, but a piece of the entire Lincoln cent timeline, carrying the essence of everything that came before it. The curve of Lincoln's cheek, the fold of his coat, the precision of the lettering, the arrangement of the date and mint mark, all these details link the coin to the skill of engravers, the decisions of mint staff, and the evolution of machine processes over generations. And when the narrative shifts from the technical to the emotional, you begin to realize how powerful a humble penny can be. It has the ability to awaken nostalgia, reminding people of childhood piggy banks, family road trips where pennies were used at toll booths, copper jars in grandparents' houses where change collected endlessly, school cafeterias where students counted exact amounts with stacks of coins spread across a tray, and the simple satisfaction of picking up a shiny cent from the ground. The 1996 is part of that collective memory, part of that shared human experience that makes the study of coins more than numbers, metal, and grades. It becomes storytelling, connection, and meaning. And as this long narrative draws to a close, the final message becomes clear. The fascination with the 1996 1-cent coin is not about whether it could ever realistically reach astronomical values, nor about chasing myths or rumors, but about appreciating the deeper journey of a coin that has lived through decades of human history. It has witnessed changes in fashion, technology, communication, global events, personal milestones, and everyday routines. And now, when you look at it through the lens of a collector or historian, the coin speaks silently, offering clues about the mint, the era, the production process, and the culture that shaped it. And so the story ends not with a dramatic twist or a sudden revelation, but with a gentle reminder to look more closely at the small things we often ignore. Because sometimes the objects we overlook hold the richest layers of history. Sometimes the smallest item, the lowest denomination, becomes the greatest teacher. The 1996 penny teaches patience, curiosity, appreciation, and the beauty of discovering value in the ordinary. And in this ending moment, the camera pulls back slowly from the single cent resting in the narrator's hand, the warm light reflecting softly off its surface, the details standing crisp against the background, and the world growing quiet as the story settles in the viewer's mind. The voice becomes softer, calmer, more reflective, explaining that the true worth of a coin is not only in auctions or catalogs or collector grading tables, but in the story it tells and the connection it forms with the person who chooses to listen. And as the screen fades, the final message lingers. Hidden treasures are everywhere, sometimes in our pockets, sometimes in our memories, sometimes in the simple objects that travel through time far more gracefully than we ever realized.